Sergeant Major Thomas Crawford listened to James Patterson's report with a face like carved granite. Behind his desk, military commendations lined the walls alongside photographs of Crawford with various members of the royal family. This was a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to service, who understood the weight of the uniform he wore and the responsibility that came with protecting British traditions and institutions. "You did the right thing reporting this, Patterson," Crawford said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. "No soldier under my command should be subjected to assault, regardless of whether they're on ceremonial duty or active deployment." He picked up his phone and made several calls, setting in motion a chain of events that Marcus Wellington could never have anticipated. Meanwhile, Marcus had returned to his luxury hotel, the Savoy, where he was staying in a suite that cost more per night than many Londoners earned in a week. He had already forgotten about the incident at the palace, his mind now focused on the evening's entertainment. He had reservations at an exclusive restaurant and tickets to a West End show. David, his assistant, sat quietly in the suite's living room, scrolling through his own phone with growing concern. "Sir," David said hesitantly, looking up from his screen, "you might want to see this." He held out his phone, showing Marcus a video that had been posted on social media about an hour earlier. The footage was clear and damning, showing the entire confrontation from beginning to end, with Marcus's face clearly visible as he spat at the guard. Marcus barely glanced at it. "So what? Some tourist posted a video. Nobody cares about this stuff." He adjusted his tie in the mirror, admiring his reflection. "Besides, I'm flying back to New York in 3 days. What are they going to do? Arrest me for spitting?" He laughed at his own joke, but David did not join in. What Marcus failed to understand was how quickly things could spread in the modern world. Sarah Mitchell, the lawyer who had filmed the incident, had not just posted the video casually. She had tagged it with relevant hashtags, shared it in multiple groups dedicated to British military appreciation, and sent copies to several news organizations. Her caption read simply, "American millionaire assaults Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace. This is absolutely disgraceful." Within 2 hours, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. Within 4 hours, it had reached 500,000. British tabloids picked up the story for their evening editions, running headlines like "Ugly American Attacks Our Hero" and "Millionaire's Shameful Assault on British Soldier." The video spread across social media platforms, shared by outraged citizens who saw it as an attack not just on one guard, but on British pride and military service itself. By the time Marcus sat down to his expensive dinner that evening, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him, the video had been viewed over 2 million times. News channels were running the story, interviewing military experts and etiquette specialists who expressed shock and disgust at Marcus's behavior. Someone had identified him by name, linking his face to his business ventures and his company website. The comments sections filled with anger and demands for justice. Back at the palace, things were moving through official channels. The Metropolitan Police had been contacted, as assault on a service member on duty was a criminal matter regardless of how minor it might seem. The American Embassy had been quietly notified that one of their citizens was under investigation. Most significantly, the incident had reached the attention of people who rarely involved themselves in such matters, but who took deep personal offense when their guards were disrespected. Marcus slept soundly that night, his conscience untroubled by the day's events. He had dealt with criticism before, weathered business controversies and legal disputes. He assumed this would blow over like everything else in his life. Another minor inconvenience that his money and lawyers could handle. He had no idea that his name was currently trending on social media across 3 continents, or that news outlets in America had picked up the story, running it with headlines about the ugly American stereotype come to life. The next morning began ordinarily enough. Marcus ordered room service, planning to spend the day visiting some high-end shops before his evening business dinner. He was checking his email when David knocked on his suite door, his face pale and drawn as if he had not slept. "We have a problem, sir," David said, practically pushing his way into the room. He carried an iPad loaded with news articles, social media posts, and emails that had been pouring into the company's official accounts overnight. A big problem. Marcus scrolled through the content with growing disbelief. There was his face, plastered across dozens of news sites and social media platforms. The video had now been viewed over 10 million times and had been featured on major news networks in both Britain and America. His company's stock had dropped 3% in overnight trading, as investors worried about the reputational damage. Several business partners had sent emails requesting immediate calls to discuss their relationships with his firm. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "It was just a bit of spit. People are acting like I committed murder." But even as he spoke, he was reading the comments, thousands upon thousands of them, calling him everything from a disgrace to America to much worse. Someone had dug up his business history, posting articles about lawsuits and complaints from former employees. His entire life was being examined and judged by millions of strangers. The phone in his suite rang. It was the hotel manager, speaking in the polite but firm tone of someone delivering unwelcome news. "Mr. Wellington, I need to inform you that several media organizations are currently in our lobby requesting to speak with you. We have security managing the situation, but I wanted to give you advance notice." Marcus looked out his window and saw television vans parked on the street below, reporters and cameramen setting up equipment. His hand shook slightly as he closed the curtains. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington felt truly afraid. This was not something he could bully his way through or buy his way out of. This was consequences, real and unavoidable. David cleared his throat. "Sir, I've been contacted by the Metropolitan Police. They want to interview you regarding the incident, and our lawyers called. They strongly advise cooperation." He paused, then added quietly, "They also suggested you prepare a public apology." "Apology?" Marcus's face flushed red. "I'm not apologizing to some soldier who was just doing his job standing still. Do you know who I am? I've built an empire from nothing. I don't apologize to anyone." But even as he said it, Marcus was learning a hard truth that his wealth had insulated him from for decades. In the court of public opinion, money meant nothing. Influence meant nothing. All that mattered was what people had seen with their own eyes on that video, and what they saw was a rich, arrogant man assaulting a soldier who could not defend himself. No amount of money could change that perception, and no lawyer could make those millions of views disappear. His phone buzzed with a call from his company's head of public relations, a sharp woman named Jennifer who had managed countless crises for the firm. Her first words were not reassuring. "Marcus, we need to talk about damage control, and we need to talk now. This situation is spiraling out of control faster than anything I've ever seen." Sergeant Major Thomas Crawford listened to James Patterson's report with a face like carved granite. Behind his desk, military commendations lined the walls alongside photographs of Crawford with various members of the royal family. This was a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to service, who understood the weight of the uniform he wore and the responsibility that came with protecting British traditions and institutions. "You did the right thing reporting this, Patterson," Crawford said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. "No soldier under my command should be subjected to assault, regardless of whether they're on ceremonial duty or active deployment." He picked up his phone and made several calls, setting in motion a chain of events that Marcus Wellington could never have anticipated. Meanwhile, Marcus had returned to his luxury hotel, the Savoy, where he was staying in a suite that cost more per night than many Londoners earned in a week. He had already forgotten about the incident at the palace, his mind now focused on the evening's entertainment. He had reservations at an exclusive restaurant and tickets to a West End show. David, his assistant, sat quietly in the suite's living room, scrolling through his own phone with growing concern. "Sir," David said hesitantly, looking up from his screen, "you might want to see this." He held out his phone, showing Marcus a video that had been posted on social media about an hour earlier. The footage was clear and damning, showing the entire confrontation from beginning to end with Marcus's face clearly visible as he spat at the guard. Marcus barely glanced at it. "So what? Some tourist posted a video. Nobody cares about this stuff." He adjusted his tie in the mirror, admiring his reflection. "Besides, I'm flying back to New York in 3 days. What are they going to do, arrest me for spitting?" He laughed at his own joke, but David did not join in. What Marcus failed to understand was how quickly things could spread in the modern world. Sarah Mitchell, the lawyer who had filmed the incident, had not just posted the video casually. She had tagged it with relevant hashtags, shared it in multiple groups dedicated to British military appreciation, and sent copies to several news organizations. Her caption read simply, "American millionaire assaults Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace. This is absolutely disgraceful." Within 2 hours, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. Within 4 hours, it had reached 500,000. British tabloids picked up the story for their evening editions, running headlines like "Ugly American Attacks Our Hero" and "Millionaire's Shameful Assault on British Soldier." The video spread across social media platforms, shared by outraged citizens who saw it as an attack not just on one guard, but on British pride and military service itself. By the time Marcus sat down to his expensive dinner that evening, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him, the video had been viewed over 2 million times. News channels were running the story, interviewing military experts and etiquette specialists who expressed shock and disgust at Marcus's behavior. Someone had identified him by name, linking his face to his business ventures and his company website. The comment sections filled with anger and demands for justice. Back at the palace, things were moving through official channels. The Metropolitan Police had been contacted, as assault on a service member on duty was a criminal matter regardless of how minor it might seem. The American Embassy had been quietly notified that one of their citizens was under investigation. Most significantly, the incident had reached the attention of people who rarely involved themselves in such matters, but who took deep personal offense when their guards were disrespected. Marcus slept soundly that night, his conscience untroubled by the day's events. He had dealt with criticism before, weathered business controversies and legal disputes. He assumed this would blow over like everything else in his life. Another minor inconvenience that his money and lawyers could handle. He had no idea that his name was currently trending on social media across 3 continents, or that news outlets in America had picked up the story, running it with headlines about the ugly American stereotype come to life. The next morning began ordinarily enough. Marcus ordered room service, planning to spend the day visiting some high-end shops before his evening business dinner. He was checking his email when David knocked on his suite door, his face pale and drawn as if he had not slept. "We have a problem, sir," David said, practically pushing his way into the room. He carried an iPad loaded with news articles, social media posts, and emails that had been pouring into the company's official accounts overnight. A big problem. Marcus scrolled through the content with growing disbelief. There was his face, plastered across dozens of news sites and social media platforms. The video had now been viewed over 10 million times and had been featured on major news networks in both Britain and America. His company's stock had dropped 3% in overnight trading as investors worried about the reputational damage. Several business partners had sent emails requesting immediate calls to discuss their relationships with his firm. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "It was just a bit of spit. People are acting like I committed murder." But even as he spoke, he was reading the comments, thousands upon thousands of them, calling him everything from a disgrace to America to much worse. Someone had dug up his business history, posting articles about lawsuits and complaints from former employees. His entire life was being examined and judged by millions of strangers. The phone in his suite rang. It was the hotel manager, speaking in the polite but firm tone of someone delivering unwelcome news. "Mr. Wellington, I need to inform you that several media organizations are currently in our lobby requesting to speak with you. We have security managing the situation, but I wanted to give you advance notice." Marcus looked out his window and saw television vans parked on the street below, reporters and cameramen setting up equipment. His hand shook slightly as he closed the curtains. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington felt truly afraid. This was not something he could bully his way through or buy his way out of. This was consequences real and unavoidable. David cleared his throat. "Sir, I've been contacted by the Metropolitan Police. They want to interview you regarding the incident. And our lawyers called. They strongly advise cooperation." He paused, then added quietly, "They also suggested you prepare a public apology." "Apology?" Marcus's face flushed red. "I'm not apologizing to some soldier who was just doing his job standing still. Do you know who I am? I've built an empire from nothing. I don't apologize to anyone. But even as he said it, Marcus was learning a hard truth that his wealth had insulated him from for decades. In the court of public opinion, money meant nothing. Influence meant nothing. All that mattered was what people had seen with their own eyes on that video, and what they saw was a rich, arrogant man assaulting a soldier who could not defend himself. No amount of money could change that perception, and no lawyer could make those millions of views disappear. His phone buzzed with a call from his company's head of public relations, a sharp woman named Jennifer, who had managed countless crises for the firm. Her first words were not reassuring. "Marcus, we need to talk about damage control, and we need to talk now. This situation is spiraling out of control faster than anything I've ever seen." Jennifer Martinez had handled public relations nightmares for 15 years, but even she had never seen a situation explode quite like this one. She sat in her Manhattan office, multiple screens displaying real-time social media analytics, news coverage, and the company's plummeting stock price. The video of Marcus spitting at the guard had become viral in the truest sense of the word, spreading like wildfire across every platform imaginable. "Do you understand what's happening here, Marcus?" Jennifer's voice crackled through the phone speaker, sharp with urgency. "This isn't just bad publicity. This is a complete reputational catastrophe. I'm getting calls from every major news network wanting statements. Your business partners are distancing themselves. 3 major clients have already sent termination notices for their contracts." Marcus paced his hotel suite, his earlier bravado crumbling with each piece of bad news. "So we issue a statement saying I was having a bad day. We make a donation to some military charity. This will blow over." But even he did not sound convinced anymore. "No, it won't," Jennifer said firmly. "Not this time. People are comparing you to the worst examples of entitled, ugly Americans abroad. Veterans groups are organizing boycotts of your properties. Animal rights activists have somehow gotten involved because you disrespected the bearskin hat tradition. This has taken on a life of its own, and it's feeding into every negative stereotype about wealthy Americans that exists." David stood by the window, keeping watch on the growing media presence below. More vans had arrived, and he could see reporters doing stand-ups with the hotel in the background. A small crowd had gathered, some holding signs that read, "Respect our troops and Wellington go home." The situation was deteriorating by the hour. A sharp knock on the suite door made both men jump. Marcus opened it to find 2 British police officers standing in the hallway, their expressions professionally neutral. The taller of the 2, a woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, spoke first. "Mr. Marcus Wellington? I'm Detective Inspector Sarah Hughes, and this is Detective Constable James Morrison. We need to speak with you about an incident that occurred yesterday at Buckingham Palace." Marcus's lawyer, hastily summoned from a London firm that specialized in international clients, arrived 20 minutes later. Richard Pemberton was a dignified man in his 60s who had seen every kind of legal trouble imaginable. He listened carefully as the detectives explained that Marcus was being investigated for common assault under British law, a charge that could result in up to 6 months in prison or an unlimited fine. "My client was simply exercising his right to free expression," Pemberton began, but Detective Inspector Hughes cut him off with a shake of her head. "Spitting at someone is not free expression, Mr. Pemberton, as I'm sure you know. It's assault. The victim, Guardsman James Patterson, has made a formal complaint, and we have clear video evidence of the incident. We're here to conduct a voluntary interview under caution, though if Mr. Wellington prefers, we can conduct this interview at the station." The interview took place in the hotel's business center, with Marcus flanked by his lawyer and David taking notes in the corner. The detectives were methodical and professional, walking Marcus through every moment of the incident. They showed him the video multiple times, asking him to explain his actions, his motivations, his state of mind. Under their questioning, Marcus's carefully constructed self-image began to crack. He tried to explain that he had not meant any real harm, that it was just a moment of frustration, that he had been drinking and was jet-lagged. But hearing his own excuses spoken aloud, seeing the disappointment in the detective's eyes, Marcus began to understand how hollow his justification sounded. "Mr. Wellington," Detective Inspector Hughes said, her voice not unkind but firm. "Guardsman Patterson is a decorated soldier who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He's faced enemy fire protecting his country. He stands at his post for hours without moving in all weather. maintaining discipline and professionalism. And you, a wealthy tourist, decided to humiliate him for your own amusement. Can you help me understand what kind of person does that? The question hit Marcus harder than any insult he had received online. He had spent his entire life thinking of himself as successful, powerful, someone who had earned the right to act as he pleased. But sitting in that room, forced to confront his actions through someone else's eyes, he saw himself clearly, for perhaps the first time in decades. He was not a successful businessman asserting his dominance. He was a bully who had attacked someone who could not fight back. After the interview concluded, with Marcus essentially admitting to the assault while offering various explanations, the detectives informed him that he was not to leave the country while the investigation continued. His passport would be flagged, and attempting to depart Britain would result in immediate arrest. The case would be referred to the Crown Prosecution Service, who would decide whether to formally charge him. Back in his suite, Marcus sat in silence while his lawyer outlined the possible outcomes. Best case scenario, he would receive a fine and a criminal record. Worst case, he could face jail time, though Pemberton thought that unlikely for a first-time offender. But the legal consequences were almost secondary to the reputational damage that had already occurred. Jennifer called again with more bad news. The company's board of directors had held an emergency meeting. They were demanding Marcus step down as CEO, at least temporarily until the situation resolved. Major investors were threatening to pull out. The company's headquarters in New York had protesters outside, many of them veterans who saw Marcus's actions as an insult to all who served. How did this happen so fast? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was one stupid moment. One mistake. Welcome to the modern world, Jennifer replied. One mistake captured on video shared by millions. Your entire legacy is being defined by 30 seconds of footage. And Marcus, I have to tell you, the narrative has solidified. You're not going to change people's minds with a simple apology at this point. You're going to have to show real change, real remorse, real consequences. That evening, unable to leave his hotel room without facing cameras, Marcus finally did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He sat quietly and thought about his life, about the person he had become. He had built his fortune by being aggressive, by never showing weakness, by dominating every situation and every person he encountered. But that approach, so successful in business, had finally met a situation where it not only did not work, but made everything worse. His phone buzzed with a message from his daughter Emily, who he had not spoken to in months. Their relationship had been strained for years, ever since his divorce from her mother, a divorce that happened because Marcus had put his business before everything else, including family. Emily's message was short. Dad, I saw the video. I'm ashamed. Please tell me the man in that video isn't really who you are. Marcus stared at those words for a long time. Was that who he was? Had he become so consumed by his own importance that he would spit at a stranger for not acknowledging him? He thought about all the people he had bulldozed over the years, all the employees he had fired without a second thought, all the business partners he had crushed in negotiations, all the relationships he had sacrificed for profit and power. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington felt genuine shame. The third day of Marcus's nightmare began with breakfast he could not eat and coffee that sat cold and untouched. He had spent most of the night reading comments about himself online, a masochistic exercise that his lawyer had explicitly told him not to do. But Marcus felt compelled to understand what people thought of him, to see himself through the eyes of millions of strangers who had judged him based on 30 seconds of video. Some comments were viciously cruel, calling for him to be jailed or worse. Others were more thoughtful, dissecting what his actions revealed about wealth and privilege in modern society. Veterans shared stories of their own service, contrasting their sacrifices with Marcus's entitlement. Parents talked about teaching their children that this was exactly the kind of person not to become. Every comment, whether angry or disappointed, cut deep because Marcus was beginning to realize they were not entirely wrong. David knocked softly before entering. Sir, Richard Pemberton is downstairs. He says the Crown Prosecution Service has made a decision. The young assistant looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes from managing the crisis, while his employer spiraled. David had fielded hundreds of calls, dealt with angry clients, and shielded Marcus from the worst of the media attention. Marcus realized he had never once thanked him. In the hotel's conference room, Richard Pemberton laid out several documents on the polished table. The lawyer's expression was grave but not hopeless. The CPS has decided not to pursue criminal charges, he began, and Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. But Pemberton held up a hand before he could speak. However, this comes with conditions. They're offering what's called a conditional discharge, which means you'll have a criminal record, but no jail time or fine. That doesn't sound so bad, Marcus said, but Pemberton shook his head. There's more. The discharge is conditional on several requirements. First, you must issue a formal public apology to Guardsman Patterson, and it must be genuine, not written by a PR team. Second, you must make a substantial donation to military charities, the amount to be determined but certainly not less than £50,000. Third, you must complete community service, specifically working with veterans organizations. And finally, you cannot leave the United Kingdom until all conditions are met and verified. Marcus absorbed this information slowly. It meant weeks, possibly months, stuck in London while his company imploded back home. It meant public humiliation on a scale he had never imagined. But it also meant avoiding jail, avoiding a trial that would keep him in the headlines for months and eventually being able to return home and attempt to rebuild his life. "I'll do it," he said quietly, "whatever it takes." That afternoon, Marcus did something he had never done in his professional life. He held a press conference where he did not control the narrative, did not have scripted answers, and could not walk away when the questions got difficult. His PR team had advised against it, but Marcus insisted. He needed to face this directly, to stop hiding behind lawyers and statements. The hotel's ballroom was packed with journalists from around the world. Cameras lined the back wall, broadcasting live to millions of viewers. Marcus stood at a podium, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped its edges. He had written notes but decided at the last moment not to use them. Whatever he said needed to come from his heart, not from careful legal phrasing. "My name is Marcus Wellington," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. 3 days ago, I committed an act that I am deeply ashamed of. I spat at a British soldier, a decorated guardsman who was simply doing his job. I have no excuse for my behavior. I was not drunk as I initially claimed. I was not having a bad day. The truth is much simpler and much worse. I did it because I'm an arrogant person who believed my wealth gave me the right to treat others with disrespect. The room was silent, except for the click of camera shutters. Marcus continued, his voice catching slightly with emotion that surprised even him. I've spent my entire life believing that success meant dominating others, that being powerful meant never showing weakness or admitting fault. I built my fortune by being aggressive, by crushing competitors, by viewing every human interaction as a transaction to win. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people as people. They became obstacles or tools or annoyances. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Guardsman James Patterson is a hero who served his country in war zones I can't even imagine. He stands for hours in all weather, maintaining discipline and honor, representing the best of British tradition and military service. And I, a tourist with more money than sense, decided to humiliate him for my own amusement. I wanted to prove that everyone has a breaking point, that no one was above my ability to affect them. What I proved instead is that some people have honor and discipline I will never possess. A reporter raised her hand and Marcus nodded. Mr. Wellington, some people are saying this apology is just an attempt to avoid criminal charges. How do we know you're sincere? It was the question Marcus had expected and dreaded. You don't, he answered honestly, and I understand why you'd be skeptical. I've been apologizing to people my whole life, not because I meant it, but because it was strategically useful. I'm good at saying what people want to hear, but this time is different because I've finally realized that my way of living has cost me everything that actually matters. My daughter sent me a message saying she's ashamed of me. My company is falling apart. My reputation is destroyed, and all of it is deserved. He took a breath, feeling tears prick at his eyes for the first time since he was a child. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking people to like me or to forget what I did. I'm just saying that I finally understand that I need to change fundamentally as a human being. Whether anyone believes me or not, I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to become someone my daughter doesn't have to be ashamed of. The press conference lasted another 30 minutes, with Marcus answering every question honestly, even the ones that made him look worse. He admitted to treating employees poorly over the years. He acknowledged cutting corners in business deals. He confessed to viewing his wealth as proof of his superiority. By the time it ended, he felt emotionally exhausted but also strangely lighter, as if releasing these truths had lifted a weight he had carried for decades. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his suite, watching news coverage of his press conference. The reactions were mixed. Some people praised his honesty, while others dismissed it as calculated manipulation. But Marcus found he did not care as much about public opinion as he expected. Something had shifted inside him during that press conference. He had stopped performing and started being genuine, perhaps for the first time in his adult life. His phone rang. It was Emily, his daughter. Marcus's hand shook as he answered. "Dad, I watched your press conference," she said, her voice neutral, giving nothing away. "Was that real? Or was it just another Marcus Wellington performance?" "It was real," he said quietly. "Emily, I know I've been a terrible father. I know I've hurt you and your mother and countless other people. I know one apology doesn't fix decades of damage. But I want to try. I want to be better." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Emily spoke, her voice softer. "Okay, Dad, I'm not ready to forgive you yet. But I'm willing to see if you mean what you say. That's all I can offer right now." "That's more than I deserve," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." After they hung up, Marcus looked at himself in the mirror. Really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. The man staring back at him looked older, more tired, more human somehow. The polish and confidence were gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. But there was also something else there. Something he had not seen in his reflection for a very long time. There was the possibility of redemption. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Marcus's hotel. Richard Pemberton called ahead to say that Guardsman James Patterson had agreed to meet with Marcus, though the lawyer warned that it was not guaranteed to go well. James was under no obligation to accept any apology, and he was coming primarily because his commanding officer had suggested it might provide closure for both men. Marcus dressed carefully, choosing a simple suit without flashy accessories. He had donated his gold watch to a veterans' charity auction the previous evening, along with several other expensive items. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a necessary step in stripping away the armor of wealth he had hidden behind for so long. James Patterson arrived precisely at 10 in the morning, accompanied by Sergeant Major Crawford. Out of uniform, James looked younger than Marcus had expected, probably in his early 30s, with the bearing of someone who had seen difficult things but remained fundamentally decent. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his eyes direct but not hostile. They sat in the suite's living room, an awkward silence filling the space. Marcus had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but now, facing the man he had wronged, all his prepared words seemed inadequate. Finally, he simply spoke from the heart. "Guardsman Patterson, I want to apologize for what I did to you. Not because my lawyer told me to or because I'm trying to avoid consequences, but because I genuinely understand now how wrong I was." Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "I treated you like you were less than human, like you were just a prop for tourists. I wanted to prove some stupid point about my own importance, and in doing so, I revealed exactly how unimportant I really am." James listened quietly, his expression neutral. When Marcus finished, he took a moment before responding. "Mr. Wellington, I've dealt with difficult people my entire military career. I've been shot at by enemies and insulted by civilians who don't understand or respect what we do. Your actions were offensive, yes, but they weren't the worst thing that's ever happened to me." "That doesn't make them right," Marcus interjected. "No, it doesn't," James agreed. "But here's what bothered me most about that day. It wasn't the spit itself. It was the attitude behind it. You looked at me like I was nothing, like my service meant nothing, like the uniform I wear and the oath I took were just a joke for your entertainment. That kind of disrespect cuts deeper than any physical assault." Sergeant Major Crawford, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Mr. Wellington, I've been reading about you since this incident. Successful businessman, self-made millionaire, all the usual accolades. But I've also seen the lawsuits from employees, the complaints about your business practices, the pattern of treating people as disposable. This incident with Guardsman Patterson wasn't an isolated mistake. It was consistent with how you've lived your entire life." The words stung because they were true. Marcus nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right, Sergeant Major. I've been a selfish, arrogant person who measured success only by money and power. I've hurt a lot of people on my way up, and I never looked back to see the damage I caused. I can't undo any of that. All I can do is try to be different going forward. Why should we believe you'll change? James asked, not challenging but genuinely curious. You've had wealth and success for years. Why would losing some of it suddenly transform you into a better person? It was a fair question. Marcus thought carefully before answering. Honestly, I don't know if I will change. I hope I can, but I have decades of bad habits and toxic thinking to overcome. What I do know is that for the first time in my life, I want to change. Not because it's strategically smart or good for business, but because I looked in the mirror and hated what I saw. My daughter is ashamed of me. Millions of people saw my true character on display, and worst of all, I realized they were right to judge me. James studied Marcus for a long moment, then glanced at Sergeant Major Crawford, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Mr. Wellington, I accept your apology, James said finally. Not because I think you've suddenly become a saint, but because I believe people deserve a chance to be better than their worst moment. I've seen good men do terrible things under pressure, and I've seen broken men rebuild themselves. Which path you take is up to you. The weight that lifted from Marcus's chest was unexpected. He had not realized how much he needed to hear those words. Needed someone he had wronged to give him permission to try again. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I won't waste this chance. After James and the sergeant major left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts. Accepting his apology was a gift, but it did not erase what he had done or who he had been. The real work was just beginning, and Marcus was starting to understand how difficult that work would be. Over the following week, Marcus began his court-ordered community service at a veterans support center in London. The organization helped former soldiers transition to civilian life, providing job training, mental health support, and assistance with housing. Marcus had expected to be given simple tasks, filing papers or answering phones, but the director, a former Royal Marine named Tom Bradley, had other plans. Mr. Wellington, I've read about you, Tom said when Marcus arrived for his first day. Rich businessman who forgot how to be human. Well, here you're not rich and you're not a businessman. You're just another volunteer who needs to prove he's worth the space he occupies. Can you handle that? Marcus swallowed his pride. Yes, sir. Good. First thing I need you to do is clean the bathrooms. Then you'll help sort donations in the warehouse. After that, we'll see if you're ready to actually interact with the veterans we serve. Tom handed him cleaning supplies and walked away without another word. Scrubbing toilets was not something Marcus had done since his teenage years, before he made his fortune. His expensive shoes got splashed with water, his suit jacket hung on a hook to avoid stains, and his hands grew red from the harsh chemicals. It was humbling work, the kind of labor he had long ago decided was beneath him. But as he cleaned, Marcus thought about the veterans who used these facilities, men and women who had sacrificed far more than their pride in service to their country. In the warehouse, he worked alongside other volunteers sorting through donated clothes, books, and household items. Most of the other volunteers were retirees or young people on gap years, all of them doing this work because they cared, not because a court had ordered them to. They eyed Marcus with suspicion at first, clearly recognizing him from the news coverage, but they said nothing. One volunteer, an elderly woman named Margaret, finally broke the ice. You're that American from the video, aren't you? She asked directly, pausing in her work of folding donated shirts. Marcus nodded. Yes, ma'am, I am. Well, at least you're here, she said pragmatically. My late husband was in the Army for 20 years. He would have been furious about what you did, but he also believed in second chances. Said he'd seen too many good men make terrible mistakes not to believe in redemption. She handed him a stack of shirts to fold. Don't make him wrong about you. Her words stayed with Marcus as the days progressed. He began meeting the veterans who came to the center, hearing their stories, learning about their struggles. There was Derek, a former paratrooper who had lost both legs in Afghanistan and was fighting to get proper disability benefits. There was Aisha, a former medic dealing with PTSD who could not hold down a job because of panic attacks. There was Colin, an older veteran from the Falklands War who had become homeless after his marriage fell apart. Each story humbled Marcus further. These were people who had given everything for their country and were now fighting just to survive. Meanwhile, he had spent years accumulating wealth he did not need, treating people as obstacles, never once thinking about those who served so he could live in comfort and safety. Tom Bradley began giving Marcus more responsibility. He helped Derek fill out paperwork for his benefits claim, using his business knowledge to navigate the bureaucratic system. He spent hours listening to Aisha talk about her experiences, offering no advice, just presence and attention. He helped Colin find temporary housing and connected him with job training programs. The work was exhausting in ways Marcus had never experienced. Building a business empire had been difficult, but it had fed his ego, made him feel powerful and important. This work did the opposite. It made him feel small and insignificant, but in a way that felt right, like he was finally understanding his proper place in the world. One evening, as Marcus was leaving the center after a particularly long day, Tom stopped him. "You're doing good work, Wellington. Better than I expected, honestly. When you first showed up, I thought you'd quit within a week, claim you'd fulfilled your obligation and disappear, but you keep showing up and you're actually helping people." "Why?" Marcus considered the question. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. Building my company, making money, that all felt important at the time, but it was just accumulation. It did not help anyone but me. This work actually changes lives, even in small ways. It makes me feel less useless." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "That's the thing about service, Marcus. It's not about you. The moment you make it about your redemption or your feelings, you've missed the point. These veterans don't care about your journey. They just need help. Can you live with that?" "I'm learning to," Marcus replied honestly. Back in New York, the company Marcus had built was struggling without him. The board of directors had appointed an interim CEO, a competent executive named Patricia Chen, who had been with the firm for 12 years. She worked tirelessly to reassure investors, maintain client relationships, and manage the ongoing fallout from Marcus's actions. But the damage was significant and continuing to grow. Jennifer, the PR director, kept Marcus updated through daily calls. 3 more major clients had terminated their contracts, citing reputational concerns. The company's stock price had fallen 18% from its peak. Several key employees had resigned, unwilling to be associated with a firm whose founder had become internationally infamous. Trade publications ran articles questioning whether the company could survive this scandal. "Patricia wants to know when you're coming back," Jennifer told Marcus during one of their calls. "The board is getting nervous. They need leadership, and while Patricia is doing her best, she's not you." Marcus sat in his small rented flat, a modest apartment he had moved into after leaving the expensive hotel. He had sold most of his luxury possessions, donating the proceeds to military charities as part of his agreement with the Crown Prosecution Service. The flat had 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and furniture from charity shops. It was smaller than his walk-in closet back in New York, but Marcus found he did not miss the space. "Tell Patricia she should stay on as CEO," Marcus said, surprising even himself with the words. "She's doing a good job, probably better than I ever did. She actually cares about the employees, not just the profits." Jennifer was silent for a moment. "Marcus, are you serious? You're just going to give up your company? Everything you built?" "I'm not giving it up. I'm accepting that maybe I shouldn't be running it anymore. I built that company using methods I'm not proud of, Jennifer. Maybe it's time for someone with actual ethics to be in charge." He paused, looking around his simple flat. "Besides, I'm starting to realize that the company was never really the achievement I thought it was. I built a profitable business, yes, but I did it by stepping on people and cutting corners and prioritizing money over everything else. That's not something to be proud of." Over the next several weeks, Marcus immersed himself in his work at the Veterans Center. He arrived early and stayed late, taking on whatever tasks were needed. He learned that Tom Bradley had founded the center after leaving the military, using his own savings and tireless fundraising to keep it operating. The center ran on a shoestring budget, constantly struggling to meet demand as more veterans sought their services. One day, Marcus was helping in the center's food bank when he noticed how sparse the shelves looked. He asked Tom about it, and the former Marine sighed heavily. "Donations are down this quarter and demand is up. We're doing the best we can, but we might have to start limiting how much food we can give out to each family." That evening, Marcus made several phone calls to his financial advisors in New York. He still had significant personal wealth separate from the company, assets and investments he had accumulated over the years. He instructed them to liquidate a substantial portion of it and transfer the funds to the Veterans Center. When Tom found out the next morning, he was stunned. Wellington, this is £250,000. That's more than our annual budget. I can't accept this. Tom held the bank transfer notification like it might explode. Yes, you can, Marcus said firmly. I have more money than I need, and you have veterans who need help. It's simple math. Use it to expand the food bank, hire more counselors, fix that leaky roof you keep complaining about. Do whatever helps the most people. Tom studied Marcus carefully. This isn't about buying forgiveness, is it? Because you can't purchase redemption, Wellington. I know, Marcus replied. I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm just trying to do something useful with resources I don't deserve to have in the first place. If it helps some veterans, then at least my money is doing something good for once. Word of the donation spread quickly through the center. Veterans who had been wary of Marcus began treating him differently, not with adulation but with a cautious respect. They saw that he was not just serving his community service hours and leaving. He was genuinely invested in their welfare, learning their names, remembering their stories, following up on their progress. Derek, the former paratrooper, got his disability benefits approved after Marcus helped him navigate the appeals process. On the day the approval came through, Derek wheeled himself over to where Marcus was organizing donations and stuck out his hand. I misjudged you, mate. Thought you were just another rich bloke doing penance, but you actually give a damn, don't you? Marcus shook his hand, feeling emotions rise in his throat. I'm trying, Derek. That's all I can do. Emily flew to London 6 weeks after the incident, her first visit to see her father since everything happened. Marcus picked her up at the airport in a modest rental car, a far cry from the chauffeur-driven luxury vehicles she remembered from her childhood. They drove to his flat in an awkward silence, both unsure how to bridge the years of distance between them. When Emily saw where her father was living, her eyes widened. Dad, this place is tiny. Why aren't you staying somewhere nicer? You can afford it. Because I don't need somewhere nicer, Marcus replied, putting on a kettle for tea. This flat has everything I actually need. Bed, kitchen, bathroom, heat. Anything more is just ego and habit. They sat at his small kitchen table, drinking tea from mismatched mugs Marcus had bought at a charity shop. Emily studied her father, noting the changes in him. He looked older, more tired, but also somehow more present than she ever remembered him being. The constant distraction, the phone calls, the impatient energy that had always surrounded him like a force field was gone. Tell me about the Veterans Center, Emily said, and Marcus's face lit up in a way she had never seen before. He talked for an hour about the people he had met, the work he was doing, the difference it made in people's lives. He showed her photos on his phone of the center, introduced her to stories of individual veterans he was helping. You really care about this, don't you? Emily asked, amazed. I've never seen you care about anything except work and money. Marcus nodded slowly. For the first time in my life, I'm doing something that matters beyond just accumulating wealth. These veterans gave everything for their country, and helping them feels like the most important thing I've ever done. More important than any business deal or financial quarter. Emily reached across the table and took her father's hand, a gesture so unexpected that Marcus felt tears spring to his eyes. Dad, I'm still angry about a lot of things. About how you treated Mom, about all the times you chose work over family, about becoming the kind of person who could spit at a stranger. But I can see you're trying to change, really trying. That means something. I don't expect forgiveness, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. I just want you to know that you were right to be ashamed of me. I was ashamed of myself, but I'm trying to become someone you don't have to apologize for. They spent the weekend together, with Marcus showing Emily around London and taking her to the Veterans Center. She met Tom Bradley and some of the veterans Marcus had been helping. She saw the food bank he had funded and the new counseling offices that were being built with his donation. By the time Emily left to return to New York, something had shifted between them. The wounds were still there, but healing had begun. 3 months after the incident that had changed his life, Marcus Wellington stood once again outside Buckingham Palace. This time, he was not there as a tourist seeking entertainment, or as an arrogant millionaire looking to assert his dominance. He was there at the invitation of Guardsman James Patterson, who had arranged for Marcus to observe the changing of the guard ceremony from a special vantage point reserved for honored guests. The autumn air was crisp and cool as Marcus watched the guards march with their characteristic precision. He saw them now with completely different eyes, understanding the discipline required, the honor they represented, the service they embodied. These were not props for tourist photos, but dedicated soldiers maintaining a tradition that stretched back centuries. After the ceremony, James met Marcus in civilian clothes. They had stayed in occasional contact over the past months, brief emails where James checked on Marcus's progress and Marcus updated him on his work at the Veterans Center. "How are you finding London?" James asked as they walked through St. James's Park. "It's become home," Marcus replied honestly. "I know I'll have to return to New York eventually, but part of me doesn't want to leave. The work at the center feels meaningful in a way nothing else in my life ever has." James nodded. "Tom Bradley told me about your donation and your work there. He says you're one of the most dedicated volunteers they've ever had. Coming from Tom, that's high praise." They sat on a bench overlooking the lake, watching ducks glide across the water. Marcus had learned to appreciate these quiet moments, to find peace in stillness rather than constantly chasing the next achievement or acquisition. "James, can I ask you something? How did you do it? Stand there while I disrespected you and not react? I don't think I could have that kind of self-control." James considered the question. "It's part of the training, obviously. But it's more than that. It's about understanding that my job, my duty, is bigger than my individual feelings. When I'm on guard duty, I'm not James Patterson. I'm a representative of the British Army, of the Crown, of centuries of tradition. What one rude tourist thinks or does doesn't change that." "I wish I had understood that earlier," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe if I had realized that being part of something bigger than myself was more valuable than personal success, I wouldn't have wasted so many years being the kind of person everyone hated." "You can't change the past," James said, "but you can choose who you are moving forward. From what I've seen, you're making that choice every day." Back in New York, Patricia Chen had successfully stabilized the company. Under her leadership, the firm had implemented new ethical guidelines, improved employee benefits, and refocused on sustainable business practices, rather than maximum profit at any cost. The stock price had recovered somewhat, though not to its previous heights. Several major clients had returned, impressed by the company's new direction. Patricia called Marcus with a proposal. "The board has been discussing your future role with the company. We all agree that you shouldn't return as CEO, but your business acumen is still valuable. What if you took on an advisory role? You could consult on major decisions, use your experience and connections, but without the day-to-day operational control that you've admitted you're not suited for." Marcus thought about it carefully. "What would that mean for my work in London?" "I'm not ready to stop what I'm doing at the Veterans Center. We can make it work remotely," Patricia assured him. "A few hours a week of consultation, virtual meetings, strategic input. You could maintain your life in London while still contributing to the company you built." It was a compromise that allowed Marcus to have both worlds. He accepted the advisory role, which provided him with enough income to support himself while allowing him to dedicate most of his time to the Veterans Center. Tom Bradley had offered him a paid position as the center's director of development, tasked with fundraising and expanding their services. It was work Marcus was surprisingly good at, using his business connections and persuasive skills for something that actually helped people. 6 months after spitting at a royal guard, Marcus stood before a gathering of veterans and their families at the center's expansion celebration. Tom Bradley had asked him to say a few words about the new facilities, which Marcus's fundraising had made possible. He looked out at the faces in the crowd, many of them people he now considered friends, and felt a surge of emotion. "6 months ago, I was a different person," he began. "I was wealthy, successful by conventional standards, and absolutely miserable, though I didn't know it at the time. I treated people as obstacles or tools. I measured my worth by the size of my bank account and the power I held over others. And then I did something so shameful, so revealing of my true character, that it was captured on video and seen by millions of people around the world." He saw some nods in the crowd, people who knew his story. "I spat at a British soldier who was simply doing his job. I did it because I was arrogant enough to think my wealth gave me the right to disrespect anyone I chose. That moment, that terrible decision, became the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to confront who I had become." Marcus gestured to the building around them. "This center, this community, these veterans you've allowed me to work with have taught me what real success looks like. It's not money or power or dominance. It's service. It's helping others. It's being part of something bigger than yourself. Derek over there taught me about perseverance. Aisha taught me about courage and facing your demons. Colin taught me that it's never too late to rebuild your life. And Tom taught me that real strength comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I will never be able to undo the harm I caused over the years. I can't give back the time I didn't spend with my daughter or repair all the business relationships I destroyed through my arrogance. But what I can do is spend whatever time I have left trying to be useful, trying to serve, trying to be the kind of person I should have been all along. The applause was warm and genuine. After the ceremony, veterans came up to Marcus to shake his hand, to thank him for his work, to share their own stories of redemption and second chances. Marcus realized that he had found something in this community that all his wealth had never provided: acceptance, purpose, and genuine human connection. That evening, Marcus video called Emily, who was now visiting him regularly and slowly rebuilding their relationship. "How did the celebration go, Dad?" she asked, her face filling the screen. "It was beautiful," Marcus said, smiling genuinely. "You know, for years I chased success and never felt satisfied. I always needed more money, more power, more recognition. But today, standing in a room full of veterans whose lives have been improved by this center, I felt something I've never felt before. I felt like I had done something that actually mattered." Emily smiled back at him, and Marcus saw pride in her eyes, maybe for the first time in his life. "I'm proud of you, Dad. Not for being rich or successful, but for being brave enough to change. That takes more courage than building an empire." As they talked, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. A moment of cruelty, captured on video and shared around the world, had destroyed his reputation and forced him to confront his own ugliness. But from that destruction had come something unexpected: a chance to build a life based on service rather than selfishness, on contribution rather than accumulation. He would never forget the feeling of standing at that palace gate, consumed by arrogance, believing his wealth made him superior to a soldier who had risked his life for his country. That memory would always shame him. But he would also never forget James Patterson's words: "I believe people deserve a chance to be better than their worst moment." Marcus Wellington had been given that chance, and he was determined not to waste it. The wealthy man who spat at a royal guard was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the positive impact you had on others' lives. It had taken public humiliation, legal consequences, and months of hard work to learn that lesson. But Marcus had finally learned it. And in learning it, he had found something more valuable than all the money he had ever made. He had found redemption, purpose, and peace.